Good evening. Welcome to tonight's council meeting for Monday, the 28th of August 2017. Could we all please stand for the opening prayer and acknowledgement of the original custodians of the land? Thanks. Lord, we ask that you guide us in our decision making, protect us in the community we serve from all that is evil, and strengthen our unity for the welfare of the city. Amen. Amen. I would like to acknowledge the Wiradjuri people as the traditional custodians of the land that we meet upon today and pay my respects to the elders, both past, present and future, for they hold the memories, culture, tradition and hopes of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that contribute to our community. Thank you. This council meeting is being webcast and recorded. By speaking at this council meeting, you agree to being recorded and webcast. Please ensure that if and when you are speaking at this council meeting that you are respectful to other people and use appropriate language. AlburyCity accepts no liability for any defamatory or offensive remarks or gestures made during the course of this council meeting. An audio recording will be made for administrative purposes. Conflict of interest declarations received by the Chair and disclosure of political donations. I have one conflict of interest declaration received thus far from James Jenkins. The conflict is non-pecuniary, significant. Brief description on the Public Officer of Albury Conservation Company, who is one of the applicants for community and cultural grants. This ordinary council meeting, CM 8.3, is the item report from Community and Cultural Committee held on Monday the 21st of August, and the action is he will leave the room. Mr Zacknich.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. This advice regards disclosure of political donations and the requirements of the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act. The Act, Section 147, requires a person submitting planning applications or submissions regarding a planning application to disclose any reportable political donation and or gifts to any local councillor or employee of council. Reportable political donations include those of or above $1,000. The disclosure statement forms are available on Council's website or from the Customer Service Centre and must be lodged in accordance with the Act. The forms are also available at the back of the chamber during meetings. In dealing with development applications, councillors need to take into account specific matters contained in the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act. Accordingly, the provisions of Section 79C1 of that Act are set out in the Council Officer's report detailing issues to be considered. The Local Government Act 1993, Section 375A, requires that a division be called whenever a motion for a planning decision is put at a meeting of the council or a council committee. Planning decision means a decision made in the exercise of a function of council under the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act, including a decision relating to a development application, an environmental planning instrument, a development control plan or a development contribution plan under that Act, but not including the making of an order under Division 2A, Part 6 of that Act. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Zacknich. Apologies. We have one apology. It's Councillor Vanderven. Councillors, thanks. Councillor Doxey.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Happy to move the Council receive, note and accept the apology of Councillor Member, Councillor Vanderven, and grant leave of absence for the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Doxey. Councillor Stutchbury.
I would like to second that, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Happy to put that motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. Now it brings us to part of tonight's business, and that is to acknowledge that we have some special guests in the chamber, and we have Mark Culverley from our Southern Sports Academy. Where are you, Mark? If you'd like to come forward and do a short presentation, that'd be fantastic. And I'd like to acknowledge that we have the athletes that are sponsored by Albury City Council in the room also, and their coaches. So welcome to Albury City Council Chamber, and I'll leave it over to you, Mark. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. On behalf of the Board of the Southern Sports Academy, I'd like to thank the City of Albury for taking the time to acknowledge the commitment and effort of the Albury-based athletes gathered here today. The Southern Sports Academy continues to provide young regional and remote pre-elite athletes with pathways and development opportunities usually available only to the metropolitan counterparts. As a past member of the Academy, I'm extremely proud to be given the opportunity to contribute to and further develop the organisation that supported me in my junior sporting achievements and career development. As can be seen, the numbers of athletes that reside in Albury and who have a scholarship with the Academy has continued to increase. In 2017, we have 28 scholarship holders and 4 coaches from our basketball, netball, water polo, golf and athlete with disability programs. Their efforts are certainly worth acknowledging. In a 12-month period, all the athletes come together at least once a month for training camps and are involved in workshops relating to topics such as leadership, sports psychology, strength and conditioning and nutrition, recovery and personal development. They're expected to follow a satellite training program as set out by the Athlete Development Manager and also participate in high-level competitions during the course of their scholarship. As you can see, the athletes gathered here today are very committed and disciplined young residents who are great ambassadors for the region and provide a fine example to other young people to look up to within the community. Quite obviously, they're also a credit to their respective families who sacrifice a great deal to ensure that children can pursue their sporting pursuits. And I'd like to thank those parents that are here with us today. The Academy is a not-for-profit organisation that relies heavily on funding provided by various government agencies, both local and state-based, to ensure that we can continue to provide a range of services and, more importantly, invest in technologies and resources required for a greater sporting pathways for our regional athletes. With this in mind, and on behalf of all involved with the Academy, I'd like to sincerely thank the City of Albury for your support for these athletes. I'd now like to call upon Jordan Harris to say a few words on behalf of the athletes from the Albury area and to make a small presentation to the Mayor to acknowledge this support.
On behalf of all the Southern Sports Academy athletes based in Albury, I would like to take this opportunity to thank the Mayor, Councillor Kevin Mack, and all the councillors of Albury for your generous financial contribution and continued support for the Academy and the work it does for regional athlete pathways. Without your support, we would not have this great opportunity to develop both in our sporting and personal pursuits. Thank you.
Thank you. Just as an aside, I'd just open the floor for any councillors that may have a question of Mark or any of the athletes that I would like to answer to this point. Councillors? Councillor Stutchby, do you have a question? Your light's on.
It isn't on, but I do have a question. Any sports covered by this, or is it a restricted number of sports?
This is a range of sports. We have 8 currently. I was chatting with the Mayor out there earlier. We're looking to increase those number of sports over the next 12 months. We'll probably have another 2 to 3 come in. But in the interest of sustainable growth with the organisation, we're quite strategic in those sports and what they'll be. There's a number of things that we look at. One, the existing pathways for those athletes that are currently there, the participation numbers, so at the club level and the athletes coming through, but also that with the athletes that we select for the programs, the key for us is having a feeling that they have the potential to make it to the next level or state level. But also once they come into the program, that it's a holistic approach, not only from a sporting perspective, but from a personal growth perspective for those athletes.
Thank you, Councillor Stutchby. Councillor Cameron.
Thank you. You mentioned athletes with disabilities. How many are currently participating in that program? So
we have 4 athletes in that program. There's 2 scholarship programs that run a little bit differently to our team programs. That's an individual athlete program, and it's a cash scholarship to those athletes, but also invited into our development opportunities, and then also athlete with disability program. So we've got 4 in that program. Initially, it used to always be 2. Last year, we couldn't split the athletes, so we decided to invest further in that.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cameron. And just in finishing, Mark, I'd just like to also acknowledge the Sports Albury committee members that are here tonight, but more so the families and parents of the young people that are here tonight. And I understand the investment in time and energy that families put in for their young people, and certainly to provide them with these opportunities and certainly access elite levels of sport in regional Australia is very difficult. So it's very important for us as a council and certainly as a community to provide that opportunity. But without the families, the young people in this room wouldn't have those opportunities. So thanks for coming along. Thanks for giving up your time this evening to be with the young people and be present here this evening. I'd like to also acknowledge the fact that Councillor Vanderven is sick, and he was going to thank you on behalf of the Sports Albury Committee, but it's my pleasure to do that also. And again, thank you for coming in. I know it was a lot of people here for just a short period of time, but it's much appreciated by myself and the councillors that you're here. And I wish you all the best in your chosen endeavours and certainly the future you have in your chosen sport, or if not, the holistic application of what you're providing. It also opens doors and also opens opportunities for them in other areas of the sporting arena. So thanks, Mark. Thanks to your team, and we look forward to your end of year function in Wagga, no doubt. And you should rotate and have an Albury this year, mate. And thanks for coming in to present. Thanks very much, guys. Thank you. So I'll just have give you a minute or so to vacate because we've got some more business to go, and I just want to give you a chance to leave, those who want to leave. But if you want to stay for our very interesting council meeting, by all means you can. Oh, no, they're all leaving. Who would have thought?
They're going home to watch it on YouTube.
You can catch it on YouTube with a bullet. Okay, CM5 councillors, a Merrill minute. There isn't a Merrill minute. CM6 action plans. We have CM 6.1 to CM 6.4. Thank you. Councillor Glacken.
Thank you, through you, Mr Mayor, to move 6.1 through to 6.4, noting that there's nothing in 6.2.
Thank you, Councillor Glacken. And we have Councillor Con.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Happy to second that.
Thank you. Councillor Glacken, did you wish to speak to that?
Thank you, no.
Thank you. There being no question or debate, I'm happy to put that motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. The minutes, CM 7.1 minutes of the council meeting held on Monday the 24th of July 2017. Councillor Glacken.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Happy to move that we receive and note the minutes and that they be confirmed from the last council meeting, 24th July 2017.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley.
I second the motion, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Thurley. Councillor Glacken, do you wish to speak to those at all?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Glacken. Happen to put that motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. CM8 reports from the council meeting. CM 8.1 report from the Planning and Development Committee meeting held on Monday the 21st of August. Councillor Glacken.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, to move the report from that meeting. I'll just get that the recommendations included in the report from the Planning and Development Committee meeting held on Monday the 21st of August 2017 be adopted. Thank you, Mr Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley.
Second that motion, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Glacken, do you wish to speak to that?
Thank you.
Thank you. There being no questions or debate, I'm happy to put that motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. CM 8.2 report from the Engineering and Works Committee meeting held on Monday the 21st of August. Councillor Doxey.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. As the Deputy Chair, in the absence of Councillor Vanderven, I move the following recommendation. That the recommendations included in the report from the Engineering and Works Committee meeting held on Monday 21 August 2017 be adopted.
Thank you, Councillor Doxey. Councillor Stutchbury.
Yes, Mr Mayor, I would like to second that.
Thank you. Councillor Doxey, do you wish to speak to that at all?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. There being no question or debate, I'm happy to put that motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Thanks. Report from the Community and Culture Committee meeting held on Monday the 21st of August 2017. Councillor Con.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that the recommendations included in the report from the Community and Cultural Committee meeting held on Monday 21st of August 2017 be adopted.
Thank you, Councillor Con. A second of thanks. Councillor Thurley.
I'll second that motion, Mr Mayor. It should also be noted Mr Jenkins has left the chamber, by the way.
Oh, he's scooted out. Thank you, Councillor Thurley. Mr Jenkins has left the building. Councillor Con, did you wish to speak to that at all?
Only briefly, Mr Mayor, just to note that the recommendations included in this motion include Council's Community and Cultural Grants Program for 2017-2018. I'm really proud that Council is supporting a number of these programs, supporting various groups in the community, including multicultural groups, youth groups, theatre groups, photography projects, and I look forward to seeing the results of those grants.
Thank you, Councillor Conn. There being no further question about, happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. If Mr Jenkins could return, that'd be great. Thank you, Mr Keys. Reports from the Finance and Administration Committee meeting held on Monday the 21st of August 2017. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that the recommendations included in the report from the Finance and Administration Committee meeting held on Monday 21st of August 2017 be adopted.
Thank you. Councillor Glacken.
Happy to second that.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley, do you wish to speak to that?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. There being no question or debate, I'm happy to put that motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. CM9, reports from the community forums. We have none. CM10, we have no notices of motion or rescission. Presentation of deputations, CM11, there are none. CM12, reports, minutes of committee and working parties. CM12.1, minutes of the Audit, Risk and Improvement Committee held on Wednesday the 16th of August 2017. Councillor Glacken.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Through you to move the recommendation that the minutes recommendations from the committee of the Audit, Risk and Improvement Committee be received and noted. From Wednesday the 16th of August be received and noted.
Thank you, Councillor Glacken. Councillor Thurley?
I'll second that motion, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Glacken, do you wish to speak to that at all?
No, thank you, Mr Chair.
Thank you. There being no question or debate, I'm happy to put that motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Thank you. CM13, there are no documents for sealing. CM14, 14.1, consideration of request under 82A for review of refusal of development application 10.2017.35149.1, shed 100 Pickworth Street, Thaguna. Thank you. Councillor Glacken.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Through you to move the recommendation as a motion that we receive and note the contents of the report and discharge our responsibilities under Section 82A of the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act 1979 by resolving to review the decision.
Thank you, Councillor Glacken. Councillor Stutchbury.
Yes, Mr Mayor, happy to second that.
Thank you. Councillor Glacken, do you wish to speak to that?
No, Mr Mayor, this is an administrative motion to enable us to go to the next motion or the next recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. CM 14.2. Did we need a division on that one? Could you raise your hands again, please, Councillor? The division is Councillor Stutchbury, Councillor Doxey, Councillor Cameron, Councillor Mack, Councillor Conn, Councillor King, Councillor Glacken and Councillor Thurley. The motion is carried. 14.2, assessment under Section 82A for review of refusal for development application 10.2017.35149.1, shed 100 Pickworth Street, Thaguna. Thanks, councillors. Councillor Stutchbury.
Yes, thank you. I move that Council note the contents of the report and, upon undertaking review of the determination of development application 10.217.35149.1, determined to either reaffirm the previous refusal or to change the original determination and grant consent subject to conditions. No?
Councillor Stutchbury, which one is it that you wish to do? Do you want to reaffirm or refuse?
I want to...
It's either reaffirm or change?
I want to reaffirm the previous refusal, sorry.
So, determined to reaffirm the previous refusal. Do we need to strike that out? Thank you.
In my defence, I thought that was very confusing.
Councillor Doxey.
Happy to second, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Doxey. Determined to reaffirm the previous refusal. Thank you. And Councillor Stutchby, do you wish to open debate on that item?
Yes, Mr Mayor, I would. I read the reports and did a site visit, and I'm not going to go into forensic detail, but in this day and age, I'm not really convinced that residents want to be putting sheds up in their backyards without going through the relevant policies and procedures, including obtaining a DA. And from a personal perspective, I didn't much like the look of the construction, nor the size of it, nor the colour of it. I think that the submissions that came through that I read were all, in fact, very reasonably written and entirely defensible.
Thank you, Councillor Doxey. Councillor Thurley, you wish to speak for? There are no speakers against at this point.
I speak in support of the motion. I have a significant problem with people carrying out developments for which they have not applied for a development application and then later seek council to approve retrospectively a development which has occurred. What it means is that it's not gone through the whole process of public submission and public exhibition, and then we are asked in this chamber to review a decision. I'm not convinced that we should I am convinced that we should confirm the refusal. The size, the scale of the development, its obtrusiveness, I don't think it's appropriate, so I will support this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Thurley. There are no further speakers for or against this particular motion. Councillor Stutchby, did you wish to close debate in relation to this item?
No, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stutchby. So I'll put the motion, and we're looking for a division on this particular motion. Thank you. So leave your hands in the air. Thanks. I'm happy to put that motion. All those in favour? Councillor Stutchby, Doxey, Cameron, Mack, Con, King, Glacken and Thurley. Thank you. The motion is carried.
Can I just add, Mr Mayor?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just for completeness, we need to note that the reasons for refusal are those earlier reasons for refusal, notwithstanding the request for review for determination. And we'll note those on the in the minute record, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Zachnich. So we have CM 14.3 Development Application 35377.1-525 Cooper Street. Conversion of existing 16 one-bedroom units to 8 two-bedroom units. Councillor Con.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that Council A, receive and note the contents of this report, and B, refuse development application 10.2017.35377.1 for the following reasons. 1, the development as proposed is not consistent with the objectives of the Albury Development Control Plan 2010, Section 10.8, with regard to improved residential amenity, higher design quality, consistency with established design codes, provision of adequate parking and landscaping, and reducing the potential for adverse impacts on adjoining lands. This results in the development not satisfying Section 79C1A Part 3 and having an unacceptable impact on the amenity of the locality, which is inconsistent with Section 79C1B of the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act 1979. 2, the development as proposed is not consistent with the controls of the Albury Development Control Plan 2010, Section 17.2 with regard to the provision of visitor parking. This results in the development not satisfying Section 79C1A3 and having an unacceptable impact on the amenity of the locality, which is inconsistent with Section 79C1B of the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act 1979.
Thank you, Councillor Con. That was certainly a mouthful. Councillor Thurley.
I second the motion, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Thurley. Councillor Con, do you wish to open debate on that item? Thanks.
Yes, please, Mr Mayor. Look, this development, as noted in the wording of the motion, is not consistent with Council's plans for the city. And I strongly believe that if we're going to make an exception to the DCP, then it has to be a truly beneficial development for Albury City. In general, I do actually support increasing density of development in the CBD. It's going to prevent urban sprawl for the city as it grows. But this particular development has no green space. The whole development is completely concreted. It's terrible from a temperature control point of view. It's terrible from a stormwater point of view. The parking on the site is extremely difficult, as well as the issues with visitor parking and the crowding around Capra Street, given its proximity to the Mercy Hospital. And in addition, we've had overwhelming opposition from the nearby residents to this development. So I cannot say that this development will definitely make Albury a better place to live. And I certainly don't believe we should ever be developing for development's sake. And I hope to see future proposals for this site that are a better offer for our residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Conn. I have a speaker against, Councillor Stutchbury.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've spent some time pondering this DA and thinking about the various reasons why people might object to it. The thing that is most at the forefront of my mind is that that particular building has sat there since 1972 when it was built. And so I suspect it probably predates most of the residents of the general area, probably not all, but most. So it's always been there. It's part of the neighbourhood. It might not be particularly pretty, but it's been there for 45 years. The alternative to renovating it, which is what has been proposed, is to knock it down. In order for it to be knocked down, some investor's going to have to look at it and think of a way to make a profit out of the site. And there may be a way of doing that, and that would be fabulous if it provided the residents and the city with a better planned building. But in order to knock it down, we're going to produce a huge amount of rubble, which probably won't be recyclable. So it'll be carted off to the landfill, where it'll take up space and it won't produce any gas for electricity. Oh, do you want me to get to the point, Councillor Cameron? Right. So, and I guess my other point that I've been thinking about is what's going to become of this site. It was an old folks' home, and now it's been vacant for 2 years, and through some miracle it has been neither vandalised nor squatted in. And I do wonder how much longer that fortunate state of events might be sustained if this DA is not given the go-ahead. And I guess my last point would be to those opponents of this development, just be careful of what you wish for, because you might get it. At the moment, the DA is for 8 high-quality 2-bedroom units, and if we knock this over tonight as a council, I don't really know what the next DA might be, but it might be for something a lot worse. So, in conclusion, although there are some issues with the DA, like car parking, could I just add as a personal aside, at my own residence, which I assume has a single car park, but I'd have to take that under advisement, there are 5 cars at my residence. I think these days having more than one car is more normal than unusual at a residence. Cowper Street's got plenty of parking, and the Mercy has been downgraded to rehab and palliative care. It's not going to be an acute hospital ever again. Don't see much car parking pressure coming from there. So in any case, I think that this DA should be allowed to go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stutchbury. Speaker 4, Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I had some and I will continue later with what I had intended to say. I'd like to say a couple of things about Councillor Stutchbury's remarks. It's certainly true that the number of cars in residence these days is higher than the norm. I live in a street with 11 houses, and I think there are 37 cars associated with those houses. And with this development, 8 two-bedroom units, our parking requirements require 8 car parking spaces and 3 visitor spaces. It would seem to me almost certain that we're going to have many more cars than that. However, I can't judge any planning matter on that. But this application is deficient in the visitor car parking spaces, and those that are provided on site are very difficult to access. They require multiple 3-point turns to get in or out, and I believe that would be a deterrent and people will park on the street, thus increasing the street car parking. I don't also accept that it's either this or something much worse. Someone could come up with better use of this site. I have the same concerns as Councillor Conn about the lack of any green space at all. It's a completely hard surfaced space. It's a heat sink. I don't think that it is good design. I don't think it provides improved residential amenity. I don't think it provides higher design quality. And although we've been told that the fittings of these places will be good, a careful reading of the plan will show, for example, we have bathrooms and toilets adjacent to kitchens. We have en-suites not separated from other areas by doors. We have lower than average ceiling heights. I don't think this is good design. We have outdoor balconies facing south, no sunlight. We have outdoor spaces accessed from bedrooms, not from living areas. This is not, in my opinion, high quality design. And one other point, and when we look at energy and efficiency and our basics requirements, this development shows no area or space for clothes drying facilities, so I presume everyone's going to have a clothes dryer. Once again, really destroying any energy efficiency that this development might claim to have. We also have cars will mingle with pedestrians on the site, so there are no clearly designated pedestrian areas. I don't think that's a big one, but once again, if you add this to all the other small design issues that, in my opinion, are not good, I think that the application should be refused for the reasons given in the report. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thurley. A speaker against, Councillor King.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm just reiterating the points of Councillor Stutchbury. I've driven down Cowper Street, I think, 30 times since the development came before council, and I haven't seen any more than 3 cars in the whole of Cowper Street. I'll just keep my my points basically to the parking aspect of it. I got onto Google Earth today and had a look at the area and noticed that there was still only 3 cars. So in my 30 times that I've driven up and down, a lot of times there's none. So I think the factor of parking is going to increase exponentially to Cowper Street and Peel Streets. Probably not that accurate. I also question the Mercy Hospital when in its heyday. It was a fully active hospital, and that parking, I'm sure, would have come all the way down Cowper Street for people there all day. In the building's previous life, it was an aged care facility. I'm not sure whether the people who lived there were prohibited from having vehicles, whether they could drive them or not. If that was the case, then theoretically, with no parking, you could have had 16 vehicles parked in Cowper Street. Being an aged care facility, you would think that there would have been some sort of care that would have come to the people in the facility, and they would have got there via vehicle, and similarly, being aged care, you would expect that, and it mightn't be true, but some visitation by people coming to visit the residents, as well as other services that are required. I also went for a walk down George Street and looked at the width of George Street, which is only 2 streets away, and there's parking on both sides of the road there. It's well used from, I presume, the Albury High School and other businesses that are around George Street, and you can't get one car past vehicles parked in the street, let alone 2. So I think there's a bit of hyperbole with the parking aspect and vehicles being able to cross paths in Cowper Street, given that the low traffic volume. I also noticed a large number of premises in George Street that are reverse in, reverse out only, and these are similar type of residences that are the flat roof, small 1-bedroom flat type of design that has a single carport off to the side in front of their premises, and the only way out of the place is to reverse out. So there's certainly no provision for 3-point parking, which this development has. So I just would like to make also a point that there's been a hell of a lot of developments that have come before council recently that have been the subject of parking restrictions, parking issues. Motorcycle parking was one. So I would look at council in the future to not really hold the parking aspect of it as high of a threshold as it does at the moment in knocking back these applications. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor King. Councillor Glucken, Speaker 4. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. If I can, is it possible to ask a question of the staff as well as to speak for the motion?
Yes, no worries. Yep.
Thank you. Through you, Mr Mayor, as the chair, to the most relevant member of staff, Councillor King raised an issue of 3-point turning, necessitating driving out of a property in a forwards direction. Can I ask the staff what is the cut-off point at which, or the redevelopment significance at which we require people to drive out in a forwards direction as opposed to a redevelopment or refurbishment or simply sale of a property where they have always been able to drive reverse out onto a property through a historical nature?
Mr Keys.
Through you, Mr Mayor, the Development Control Plan requires vehicles on where it's flats, medium density housing or residential flat buildings, that all vehicles enter the site and exit the site in a forward direction. Where we've got redevelopment of a site, that would be one of the requirements that we'd be certainly looking at. In this case, that was one of the considerations that we had, certainly given the density that's proposed. In the original format and layout of the property, it was still possible to enter the property and exit in a forward direction. I don't believe we were seeking to change that in any significant way.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr Keys.
Clarifying question, Mr Chair. My question is really trying to discern the difference between the properties that Councillor King has raised on George Street, where they can't, there's only one direction that they can go in and one direction they can go out. So he's trying to draw a comparison. Can I ask for clarification as to why we don't insist that those houses in George Street are able to drive out in a forwards direction?
Mr Keys.
Through Mr Mayor, unfortunately I'm not exactly familiar with the exact properties to which Councillor King referred to, but if people choose not to enter and exit their properties in a forward direction, then that is their own personal choice. But our intent, and when we do an assessment or undertake an assessment, we seek to ensure that a vehicle can turn around and manoeuvre so that it can enter and exit in a forward direction.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr
Do you
Chair.
speak for the motion, Councillor?
Yes, indeed. Thank you. I believe that this development, this proposed development, and the redesign of the existing property is too much of a compromise to meet the needs of the development control plans and the LEP and the environmental planning assessment for AlburyCity. I do believe that the proposed redevelopment has made the best of the opportunity given them, noting the original design. However, it falls short of being able to meet the requirements that I believe are reasonable and acceptable here in the City of Albury and in that location. Councillor Stutchby raised a number of areas that I'd like to debate or give a counter-argument here this evening. Councillor Stutchby raised the issue of rubble and that it wouldn't be able to be recycled, or he said that the rubble would be a waste. My understanding is that a substantial amount of the existing building would be able to be recycled through our own waste facility. Councillor Stutchby also said that many of the properties in that area were built after this building. I do not agree with that. I believe many of them, of the existing properties, were built prior to this building. And I do apologise if I have misunderstood your comments, Councillor Stutchby. I also note that Councillor Stutchby said that he has 4 cars at his property, 5 cars at his property. We have 4, often 5, and there are times we have 6 cars at our property, all of which can be parked on our property, one house. And so we are able to house all of those cars, should we have visitors coming and staying over, on our property. I don't think it unreasonable to assume that this development will generate more than the 8 cars that would likely be owned by people living on that property. So therefore, I believe it is reasonable to expect that they ought to be able to house the number of cars that our requirements here in this city need them to have. I think this proposal, should we allow this proposal and this development, then it would create precedents into the future. And there would be others in that vicinity, not just along that street, but within that vicinity, who could also request and submit redevelopment applications that wouldn't necessarily have sufficient parking within their development proposals either. And where would we sit in those situations should we allow this development to take place? So therefore, I cannot support the progression of the development as it is. I do, however, reiterate that I do believe that the design has done the best that it could with the existing building. However, I do not believe it is sufficiently adequate to be able to be agreed to by Council. So I support this motion as a recommendation. Thank you, Mr Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Gleichen. There being no further speakers for or against or questions, I'd just like to briefly speak for this particular motion. And I believe in the previous speakers that there's been a number of issues raised in relation to this development, parking being one of them. But if you peruse the reasons for refusal, there's more than just parking. There's a lack of landscaping, a lack of open space. There's a lack of acceptable design quality and amenity. And I think encouraging this sort of development in Cowper Street, or particularly anywhere where it doesn't fit within the amenity of this street, there's been no thought put into the development. And looking at the design of the particular development, it would appear that it is not being done at a high level and is not consistent with the claims made by the applicant. I believe it is a good reason to refuse the development, all the issues that have been raised by the staff, and I commend the report, and I certainly will be supporting the motion as it stands. Councillor Con, did you wish to
Close the debate.
Yeah, close debate. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm glad that you've just raised the other points in point 1 that weren't parking so that I don't have to read them again. Both of the speakers against have failed to address any of those other issues. And with property values soaring the way that they have been and the location of this block close to the CBD, I am confident that we're going to see other proposals to develop this block, and I sincerely hope that they're going to be better proposals to develop this block. We talk a lot about livability through the EvoCities program, about attracting young people from the cities to come and move to Albury to activate the CBD. This is not how you do it. We need to be building high quality, medium density development with open space. People don't move to Albury to live in a paved concrete block without space to park. Look, I wish that Albury had good enough public transport and active transport facilities that we didn't need to have 2 cars each, but the reality is that people still drive in Albury, and I do believe that the parking is an issue. In conclusion, I don't think we should support this development. I don't think we should support development for development's sake, and there is not good enough reason to make exceptions to the DCP on this one.
Thank you, Councillor Con. So I'm happy to put the motion, and it is a division, so please leave your hands in the air. Those for the motion, Councillor Doxey, Councillor Cameron, Councillor Mack, Councillor Con, Councillor Glacken and Councillor Thurley. Those against the motion, Councillor Stutchby and Councillor King. I declare the motion won. Thank you, councillors. CM 14.4, the Albury Airport Master Plan 2017, contract number 17-00468. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that Council accept the tender from the Airport Group for contract number 117/00468 for the provision of the Albury Airport Master Plan 2017 for a total lump sum of $150,206, including GST.
Thank you, Councillor Thurley. Councillor Doxey.
Happy to second, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley, did you wish to open debate? I've just got a question from Councillor Stutchby, if you don't mind. Councillor Stutchby, you have a question?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Through you to the relevant member of staff. I note in the report that the preferred tenderer scored lower on qualitative assessment, but higher on quantitative assessment than perhaps the second most eligible tenderer. And I just wonder if it could be explained to me how these differences are resolved at a staff level.
Mr Ferris.
Mr Mayor. Certainly the assessment panel considers both the qualitative and the quantitative, and the qualitative's undertaken on the criteria set out. So we obviously had some relatively low prices, but some of the submissions reflected some shortcomings that the panel's identified. So working through those and working on a value for money proposition based on, as said, the qualitative and quantitative, then the Airport Group was seen as the preferred.
I do, through you, Mr Mayor, to the most relevant member of staff. I read in the report that council staff had set aside $200,000 for this particular tender, and I think all but one of the, perhaps two, came in below that, and yet when the second most preferred tender, which came in at about $196,000, it was quoted in the body of the report that this price was prohibitive. I just wonder, given that it was $4,000 below the expected budget, how this quote could be considered prohibitive.
Ferris.
Through you, Mr Mayor, the cost prohibitive statement was relative to the recommended tenderer. So except that the 196 is well within the budget, or within the budget. But the differences in the submissions between the airport group at $150,000 versus the 196. We believe that the 150 presented a sound submission that will achieve the objectives of the tender and therefore represented better value for money.
Thank you, Councillor Stutch. Thank you, Mr Ferris. We have Councillor Thurley. Did you wish to open debate on this item?
I just want to briefly comment. I mean, it was a very comprehensive report. Clearly, a lot of interested parties, so we had a significant number of tenders to compare to each other, and that's always good to have competition. So I think we're probably going to get a good result out of this one. I commend the report and the recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Thurley. No further questions. I'm happy to put that motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. CM 14.5, the introduction of a trial tenant landfill voucher system. Thank you, Councillor Glacken.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Through you, move to move the recommendation that council support the implementation of the trial of an electronic landfill voucher request system for tenants' use at the Albury Waste Management Centre through an online system or applying at the Customer Service Centre for one voucher in 2017-18, and B, report back to council by June 2018 on the outcomes of the trial tenant voucher system. Mr Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Glacken. Councillor Thurley.
I'll second the motion, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Glacken, did you wish to open debate on that item?
Very briefly, Mr Mayor, I believe this is a fantastic opportunity for us to trial another system. It will also enable us to determine whether or not it is possible to get the waste vouchers to tenants, as has often been raised as an issue within our community. It's a great facility to be able to use our waste centre. The tip vouchers, as we've read in the report, are utilised, and we need to do everything we can to encourage people to use our facility in the most efficient and effective way possible. And the system of the tip vouchers or the waste centre vouchers is a great initiative introduced by council a good number of years ago now, and this brings us towards being able to make a fairer allocation of those vouchers. So I look forward to the trial and look forward to the outcome of that. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Glacken. Councillor Conn, did you wish to speak for this item? There are no speakers against.
Sure, only briefly, Mr Mayor.
Yes.
It's been raised with me by a number of residents that some tenants aren't receiving their tip vouchers, so I think this is an excellent proposed solution. We certainly shouldn't have a two-tier system where some residents can access council services and others can't. We should absolutely be treating all residents equally, whether they rent their property or own their property. So I'm pleased to support this.
Thank you, Councillor Conn. Councillor Glacken, did you wish to close debate?
Yes, Mr Mayor, thank you very much. Look forward to the trial. Thank you.
Thank you. On that note, I'm happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. CM 14.6, the Albury Gold Cup local public holiday. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Cameron.
It gives me great pleasure to move the motion that council support the half-day public holiday for the 2018 and 2019 Albury Gold Cup, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Glacken.
Thank you. Happy to second that recommendation as a motion.
Thank you. Councillor Cameron, would you wish to speak to that?
Yes, Mr Mayor, I remember well back in 1995 when, against great opposition, we were successful in getting this half-day holiday first declared. It was opposed vigorously by the Conservative members of council and by the Albury Chamber of Commerce in those days. They predicted it would be the ruination of Albury and that the businesses of Albury would go broke, there would be a collapse in the economy, the sky would fall, people's livestock would die, chickens would stop laying, and all sorts of calamities. Curtains would fade. These days, it gives me a delicious, ironic satisfaction to observe that the Chamber of Commerce endorses the event and appreciates the event, that many businesses sponsor booths and tents out at the event, and the people of Albury generally have come to love it for the success that it is. I'd like to pay tribute back then to Councillors Frank Millen and Gary Purtell, without whose vote we never would have had got this day up. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cameron, and thank you for the history lesson. There being no further speakers for or against, I'm happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. CM 14.7, alcohol-free zones and alcohol prohibited areas, public exhibition results. Councillor Doxey.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm happy to move the following recommendation that Council A adopt the renewal of the alcohol-free zone in the Albury Central Business District. B, adopt the renewal of the alcohol-free zone in the Lavington North Albury Central Business District. C, adopt the renewal of the alcohol prohibited area in QE2 Square. D, adopt the renewal of the alcohol prohibited area in the Botanic Gardens. And E, adopt the renewal of the alcohol prohibited area in Noriel Park on Australia Day from 9 a.m. until 9 p.m. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Doxey. Councillor Thurley.
I'll second that motion, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Thurley. Councillor Doxey, do you wish to speak to that motion?
I'm happy to take any questions that might be arising, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. You reserved your opening. Councillor Stutchbury, you have a question?
Yes, Mr Mayor, I do have a question. I'm a little confused, which is not necessarily unusual, but I just wonder what has happened to the alcohol-free zone from 12 midnight to 12 midday on Monument Hill, which was discussed at council some months ago. It doesn't appear to be on this motion.
Thank you.
Where did it go? How did it disappear?
It does indicate in the conclusion that there wasn't adequate evidence to support it, so it's not part of the recommendation. Did you wish, Mr Jenkins, to go through a bit further with that?
Well, now that you've suggested it, yes, I would, through you, Mr Mayor, like the relevant member of staff to take us through the
process.
Yes.
Thank you. Mr Jenkins.
Through you, Mr Mayor. Council adopted 2 months ago to support the establishment of an alcohol prohibited area at Monument Hill. It was required to go through a statutory process of public exhibition, including notifying the New South Wales Police and licensees in the area, and we undertook that process. During that process, there was 7 submissions, and 6 of those were negative towards the Monument Hill being established. There was also a submission from the police, which identified that at Monument Hill there had been no substantiated disturbances in relation to alcohol on the Anzac Day period we were talking about. Under the guidelines which Council is required to follow as part of the Act, we also have to have the support of the police as part of that establishment of an alcohol prohibited area. The New South Wales Police supported the renewal of all those zones that are up on the screen there, items A to E, but there was no support for Monument Hill in the advice we received from the New South Wales Police. As a result, as a member of staff, we recommended that that area not be included in the alcohol prohibited areas or alcohol-free zones that Council was looking to resolve.
Thank you, Mr Jenkins. Councillor Stutchbury, you clear on that now?
Just one more question through you, Mr Mayor, to the relevant member of staff. The submissions against the proposal, who do they come from?
Mr Jenkins.
Through you, Mr Mayor, the submissions are in attachment 1 or 2, and they came from 5 individuals. 1 came from the RSL, and the 7th submission came from New South Wales Police in response to a letter we wrote to the police.
Councillor Stutchbury.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now we're up to speakers 4. We had Councillor Doxia. Open debate. Councillor King wishes to speak against the motion. Thanks.
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Point of order, Mr. Mayor. There has been no speaker yet for the motion. Councillor Doxey reserved his right, so I'd like to speak for the motion.
So be it. Thank you, Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, I did support the initial motion, which was to establish those 5 plus the additional alcohol-free zone at Monument Hill on Anzac Day. I supported it knowing that it would go to public exhibition and we would receive community feedback. We've received community feedback. I accept the feedback. There is no substantiated evidence. The police are not in favour of establishing a further zone, and there were a number of other public submissions. I'm happy to accept that as good evidence that it's not required. None of that, of course, says that it stops us ever doing it again if we encounter trouble. So I don't have any problem accepting the public submissions, and I'm happy to accept the 5 zones there without the Monument Hill one, and that's why I'll vote for this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Thurley. Councillor King, you wish to speak against?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, I'm speaking against the motion as it stands at the moment. I included or raised the issue regarding drinking at Monument Hill, predominantly out of an article that appeared in the Border Mail on the 27th of April this year, and that Councillor Doxey was quoted as saying that people that were seen drinking at the monument had exercised very, very poor judgment. I have a lot of respect for Councillor Doxey, and I took what he said and agreed 100%. I also believed the report in the Border Mail. I have a lot of respect for the Border Mail as well, and also being a former policeman, I have had numerous experiences on Anzac Day in my 17 years at the police force with alcohol-related crimes. So I raised this point. I probably didn't realise that I was going to get, as the paper said, a bit of a backlash, albeit that there was, I think, 6 respondents and one organisation, and I look at the emails that I think 4 of them were sent on the 10th of July between 4:24 p.m. and about 6 o'clock. And then there were a couple of others sent closer to tonight's meeting. A couple of the emails seemed quite passionate about whether the people do drink at the dawn service or not. Fred Chapman asked us to not overreact, and then if we invoked this, he'd never attend the service again. There was another email from Dennis Savage who asked us to concentrate on wasting ratepayers' dollars on monuments to ourselves. And the rest of the submissions were a little bit more complimentary to council. As I said, I raised this motion. I know that the people who wrote in are representing a particular group and their previous careers. I spoke on behalf of other people that attend the dawn service, and that's young children, young families, scouts, Girl Guides, elderly people that want to go there and probably enjoy is not the right word, but take in the service without any distraction. I personally don't think whether there was people drinking there or not, that it's certainly a good look. I think it's a sacred day, and I think that it's for 2 hours, given that that's pretty much how the dawn turn service goes for, and that that the amount of alcohol consumed for the rest of the day is certainly enough. So again, I raised this back when I forwarded the motion, that we don't necessarily need to give people a kickstart. A lot of the submissions that have come to me have or came to council have highlighted, what incidences. As I said, it's probably a couple of people having a drink, not necessarily soldiers or returned soldiers. Maybe the bogan element of town. I don't know, but I'm against the motion as it stands, and they're the reasons that I think that we're in modern times. We look back on the past, but alcohol is a significant issue in Albury and Wodonga and in most Australian cities. So I think this is a good initiative, and I think that we, I hear what people are saying with these reports. There's passionate submissions. I could probably say they're all from the RSL or affiliated groups. One or two are not from here. But anyway, look, I hear what people are saying, and I've taken it on board.
Thank you, Councillor King. I will Speaker for Councillor Cameron.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Councillors, what we have tonight is an example of the system working how it should work. The changes of this nature are required to go out for consultation, and on the basis of the public comment from that consultation, we should then reconsider whether we go ahead with the changes that were mooted. I was prepared to support a prohibition on alcohol on Anzac Day from 12 o'clock midnight, I think it is, till 10 or 12 the next day, it was proposed. And I pay a compliment to Councillor King. I believe his motives in this have been honest and well-meaning and not naive at all. His reasoning is sound and partly persuasive. But I am not prepared, based on the feedback that we have had from our community consultation, and in particular the RSL, and if we wouldn't listen to the RSL on this matter, then who would we listen to, I wonder? This was initially sparked by a story in the Border Mail. It is to be hoped that the Border Mail makes reasonable efforts to ensure that its stories are researched and the veracity of what's being reported is established. However, as time has gone on and more people have come forward, it appears only to be one person from the Border Mail who ever saw anybody allegedly drinking on the Monument Hill on Anzac Day. No other person can corroborate that story, not the police, not the RSL, nobody. I would not, like Councillor Thurley, rule out in the future, if there was shown to be a problem with alcohol drinking on the Anzac Day ceremony, to put in place restrictions. But at this stage, I'm not persuaded and could not be persuaded to go ahead and impose those restrictions based on a problem that we don't seem to have. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cameron. I will Speaker against Councillor Stutchbury.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm not, in fact, against items A through E on this motion. I'm just against removal of the alcohol-free zone at Monument Hill on Anzac Day from 12 midnight to 12 midday. I just would make a couple of points. I think that we should be proactive rather than reactive. So there's been no reported episodes of drunken behaviour on Monument Hill on Anzac Day. So therefore we don't need to ban alcohol. Well, how about we look at it the other way and ban the alcohol and prevent the episode that apparently hasn't happened. Secondly, I would just like to say that we're banning, the Monument Hill proposal was banning alcohol from 12 midnight to 12 midday on Anzac Day. Now, I don't mind a drink or two, but I don't think that I would really think many people will be missing out on too many drinks between 12 midnight and 12 midday on one day of the year. If this ban were to go ahead. I think what the ban that we're discussing was attempting to do was to set a standard. It wasn't looking to have people arrested or fined. It was putting a line in the sand and saying we, AlburyCity Council, don't wish for people to be drinking on Anzac Day at Monument Hill between 12 midnight and 12 midday. So I would like to, I'm confident that we all support this idea of Councillor King, so I'd like to foreshadow that should this this motion be voted against, that an amendment F be added to what's on the screen in front of us, which would be to put back in the original ban on Monument Hill 12 midnight to 12 midday on the 26th of April.
Thank you, Councillor Stutchbury. Noted. Speaker 4, Councillor Conn.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I am going to speak in support of the motion as it currently stands, but I'll be the first to acknowledge that we have a problem with alcohol in this community. Certainly, as someone that spends weekends working in our emergency department, I know that alcohol is an issue. But I also love democracy, and I think we need to encourage participation from the community in the decisions that we make. I agree with Councillor Cameron that this is how the system works. And we've made a decision that I agreed with at the previous meeting. I thought it was a good decision in theory. We've put it out for public comment, and the community, including New South Wales Police, have responded overwhelmingly that they don't want this. And I think that we need to take that feedback on board. I don't think we should be a council that asks for feedback and then ignores it. And I do acknowledge the hypocrisy that this council ignored the negative feedback received to the new economic development incentives that were approved at the planning committee last week. So I will be supporting the motion as it currently stands. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Conn. I have no further speakers against. I have Councillor Glaken speaking for the motion.
Thank you, Mr Chair, and I do acknowledge that technically I have no right to speak for under the meeting protocol, except if the Mayor allows that, so thank you. I wish to indeed speak for this recommendation as a motion. A number of things have been said during debate for this topic this evening. If we were to consider the issues that we as a community, as many communities, but we as a community have with alcohol, and if we were to take what Councillor Stutchbury has said seriously, then we should be being proactive in banning alcohol across the entire city, not just at the monument and not just for the 12 hours that have been said. So I really think that we need to take this matter and look at it as a reasonable reaction, noting, of course, that it was apparently one article in the Border Mail that Councillor King has not been able to verify, other than to say that he believes that the Border Mail is very honest or truthful or does their research. I therefore believe that this is the right motion that we have before us this evening, because this is the result over a number of years, and we've added spaces as time has moved on to the areas that are either alcohol prohibited or alcohol-free zones. And we cannot simply add things because someone read an article in the paper. We need to ensure that we have the documentary evidence to support the actions that we as a council take. The two services, not just the dawn service, but the two services that are held as part of the community's acknowledgement and commemoration of Anzac Day held up at the Monument Hill are significant parts of our community. And if there really was an issue with alcohol up there, I am sure that we as a council would react to that. And I agree with Councillor Thurley's sentiment this evening, included in his speaking for this motion, that if it becomes an issue, then we as a council would take action towards resolving that. I do support the recommendation as a motion that we have here this evening. Thank you, Mr Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Gluck, and there are no speakers against. Councillor Doxey, did you wish to close debate on this item? Thanks.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and let me start by thanking my fellow councillors for their contribution, both for and against the motion that will be before you very shortly. I'd like to address a couple of issues to some of the comments made by some of the councillors. First to Councillor King, and I understand where you've come from, and I appreciate your comments in regard to this particular your side of the argument. Councillor Conn made a couple of good points, and while alcohol is an issue in the community, domestic violence is far worse, but that's not part of the debate tonight. Councillor Suchbury, all the homework was there before us over the last couple of days that gave the details of why option 1 was not preferred and option 2, as it appears on the screen tonight, and the recommendation before you was put forward by council staff. I thank the council staff for their submission, and including the 7 individual submissions, the submission from New South Wales Police and the submission from the City of Albury RSL sub-branch. It's interesting because Councillor King raised the point that I made a comment for the Board of Mail. True. I received a phone call whilst I was in Sydney on Anzac Day. I was not present here. I assumed that the reporter from the Board of Mail was accurate in what he said. It would appear that this is not the case. There was no body, there was no smoking gun, therefore there was no evidence to support such a claim. I'm not saying the Board of Mail didn't write accurately, David. However, no gun, no evidence, no fingerprints, no witness, no case.
No body.
Exactly right. As the past president of the City of Albury RSL sub-branch, and I don't disqualify myself tonight because I'm not the president, quite clearly there was never an issue on Anzac Day and there has not been an issue raised. I've attended both the monthly meetings and every single member voted in favour of submitting an article to the City Council not supporting a potential ban at the Albury War Memorial on Anzac Day. There was no evidence of that. A lot of those members are elderly, they are veterans, they are partners of veterans, or they are widows. The older ones don't have computers. If they did, they would probably have written individual submissions also to go with the other 7 submissions that came in. They wouldn't be the only ones that I've spoken to across the community. There are a lot more people that think this is bloody-mindedness and a knee-jerk reaction to a nothing. There were 2 options considered. Option 1 included the element there of banning alcohol at the Albury War Memorial Anzac Day from midnight until midday. Detailed work, submissions and good groundwork from the council staff came up with option 2, which is the one before you tonight. Let me first off thank the New South Wales Police for their submission in relation to there was no evidence, and that is the key word in the Act. There has to be a demonstrated criminality or damage of some other kind to justify why this would be imposed. We cannot sit around this chamber as councillors and simply put a ban in place. we do not have that authority, as my understanding is. We have to consult the local police commander, and that's what's happened. And we have to then consult anyone that's relevant, and that could include, but not in this case, did we, the Indigenous community, because that is also part of their patch. So I recommend to my fellow councillors that the recommendation before you on the screen is the recommendation we move with. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Doxey. On that note, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Those against? The motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. Thank you for the debate. CM15 officers' reports for noting. There aren't any delegates' reports for noting. CM16. Councillor Conn.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that Council receive and note the report from the Mayor, Councillor Kevin Mack, on his attendance at the 2017 National General Assembly of Local Government and Regional Cooperation and Development Forum, held in Canberra from Sunday the 18th of June to Wednesday the 21st of June 2017.
Thank you, Councillor Conn. Councillor Thurley.
I'm happy to second the motion, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Thurley. Councillor Conn, did you wish to speak to that motion?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Happy to take any questions, councillors, if you wish to ask any questions in relation to the body of the report. No questions. I have put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Thank you. CM17, notice of urgent business. I haven't been made aware of any notices of urgent business, and nothing seems to be lighting up the board. Confidential matters, we have none. The meeting is closed at 7:20 p.m. Thank you, councillors. We continue a